just as a bit of a background, I had some conversations because my thing says Dwayne Chambers, CMO of CMO or whatever it is. I was the CMO of P.F. Chang's until about 6 weeks ago, and we sold the company, which was, as I answered here, part of the plan, right? So my number two became my number one, and it was a part of that plan. I've been blessed over the last 32 years to be with a lot of really cool brands and with a lot of really cool people. McDonald's and Sonic and Red Robin and Krispy Kreme and P.F. Chang's and some others, and have led marketing there. And so I was thinking about what to talk about tonight, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to actually share from the kid in me, maybe some things from my wall of shame, a couple maybe from my wall of fame, but really just some learnings, right? And what I've seen as a CMO, and candidly, interestingly enough, and I didn't know what his intro was going to be, some things potentially about technology, because in a lot of ways, as a CMO, we're letting technology actually take our jobs in a lot of ways. I don't know if any of you feel that way, but sometimes you can sit in a room and it says, okay, well, the CMO thinks we should go this way, and some data analyst over here says we should go this way. More often than not, today, people are looking at, tell me more about this data, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that and some of the learnings for that, and how do you potentially use that as a tool. But again, at some point, there's facts and there's also truth. And sometimes the facts don't always lead us to truth. And I think you saw a couple of those examples there. So I wanted to share just a little bit of that with you. A couple of the assumptions that I made early in my career was that CMO owns the brand. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I don't think that's true. And why, and also that now the new word, we own the customer journey, right? And so we're going to talk about the fact that probably the customer should probably own the customer journey. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and what CMOs do to that. I also want to share a little bit about, from a learning standpoint, I had a great guy in my career back in Sonic, a guy named Mike Perry was in charge of operations, and I know that's weird for the marketing person to laud somebody from operations, but a couple weeks on the job, Mike was talking to his staff, and they had done some product tests, and I don't even remember what it was, and he said, hey, team, so how was that test? And they were like, oh, the test was a failure. It was just horrible. He's like, well, why was it a failure? Well, we didn't sell many of them. We spent a whole bunch of money. We had a bunch of leftover product. It all went bad. Just a failure of a test. And he looked at him, and he said, well, would you do it again? And the guy looked at him like he's an idiot, and he goes, well, of course we wouldn't do it again. I told you it was a failed test. And he said, well, it sounds like it was a successful test. And it really taught me something at that point about why we do what we do, and that we should be learning from all of those things. And that was the point that he was making to them, is the reason that we test. It's the reason that we do things. And while there's going to be tons of data, and we're going to get more and more and more data, at some point, someone's got to interpret that data, right? At some point, somebody from a qualitative nature has to take that from here to here and put those two things together. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So the first thing that the little child inside of me started telling me was to stop, and to stop trying to be everything to everyone. And it's one of the things from a restaurant industry standpoint you see all the time. You know, the restaurants start off as a specialty, and then they start adding this, and they start adding this, and they start adding this. But it's not just restaurants. I mean, the last time you went down the detergent aisle, if you've been down the detergent aisle, what's different about a detergent, right? This one's blue, and this one's green, and this one has crystals. Everything just starts getting generically in the middle, and then our consumers get generically in the middle, and they just don't care, right? We lose what made us special because we continue to think we got to start picking up increments in different places. And from a restaurant standpoint, boy, you see that. It's like, well, so literally the other day, I won't say what the brand was, but a CEO of a brand asked me to go in and to evaluate something they were doing. And it was a burger company, and they had added pizza. And I'm like, why? Right, what are you doing? And as a good example of that in my own career, I've done that. So I'm making fun of myself. Best pizza I've ever eaten? Literally, McDonald's. I introed pizza at McDonald's in my career in New Orleans. Hands down, if you were to eat the pizza, blind taste test, you'd have picked the McDonald's pizza. Total failure, why? Nobody wants pizza at McDonald's, right? Back to facts and truth, right? The facts is this is going to be a home run. The truth is no one's going to eat it, right? And so these are the things that then kind of start plaguing the mind as we do them. And as a CMO, I've done it over and over and over again. And then I wonder why then our guests began to leave us, because we start making things complex, right? It's something I've done. I would imagine every one of you has a smartphone, right? That's an incredibly complex thing. Does anybody here think they could stand up and explain how that thing works, right? And how it gets to the satellite and how it can tell you anything that's ever happened in the universe in 3 seconds or less? No, couldn't do that. But we use them all the time because somebody in their brilliance has made something really complex very simple. And then from a CMO standpoint, I spend most of my life doing the opposite, right? I want to take something that was really, really simple and I want to try to add all of these journeys and all of these connections and make it really complex. And then finally, particularly with young people, they go, I'm done, right? I want to move on. I'm going to do something else. I'm incredibly bored with you. The other thing I learned, go back to the beginning. No matter what brand I was with, I would get there, and the reason they hire the new CMO, right, was not because everything was great. Usually it's like, hey, we need a change, and they want to change everything. And what I found out at these brands is, you know what, if I went back to the original, somewhere it was special. It was unique. They were doing something right. There was a reason why Krispy Kreme lasted 75 years when I got there. And by the way, I'll tell you, they lasted 75 years without a CMO. They had never had one before. And so people internally would say, that's why we've made it this long. And I will also tell you a true story. Krispy Kreme, I literally got there and they weren't using it, but I went to a copy room and found carbon paper. It actually existed at Krispy Kreme when I got there. But you know what? Here's the thing. When I went back and found, and they had been through some roller coasters. Many of you maybe have seen part of that. But they went up to $50 a share and now doing $1. They were almost bankrupt. I showed up at about $3 a share with a lot of lawsuits of franchisees that had been around for 75 years, 3 generations of franchisees there. But ultimately, in the end, that brand was at least strong enough that people couldn't destroy it, but it was about the core of what that was about. And believe it or not about a donut. As much as you want to think it was, though I will tell you, my most successful post ever, we went from almost 0 Facebook fans to about 7 million. Most successful post, as hard as I tried, was a picture of a glazed donut on a white background. That was the most successful post we had. Glazed donut, white background, and it also caused people internally to go, and why do we need you, right? I think we could have figured that out. But ultimately, in the end, what you find out in that brand, it was about joy. It was truly about joy, and that's what it was about. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second as well. Then I got to give up. I just have to give up the fact that I think I'm in control. I was, and I'll have to redact some of the names here. I was with a company in a PE firm, and I was in New York City at a meeting of all of their companies and their executives. And forgive whichever side of the political fence you're on, right? They happened to be on the Hillary Clinton side of the fence. Let's just say the entire room was. And it was on the day after the election. That's when they had this meeting in New York City, about a block from the Trump Tower, okay? And this is the greatest ever because the keynote speaker was talking about the absolute predictive analytics that he had in life in general, and he could predict anything. This was what he was speaking about that day. And I'm looking at him going, are you kidding me? You should have figured out a different thing to talk about today. Because if nothing else, that election would tell us that you can't predict everything. And we're in that mode. We think the more data we get, then it becomes predictive and it feels like a nice warm blanket, doesn't it? Our executives think, if I have enough data, then that'll be predictive and then I don't have to take any risks. Well, data's a tool. But it's not, again, you saw the plane crash, right? Did you want data to do that? Did you want the data to figure out where that plane should land? Or does it need to be a human? If one of your kids got sick, do you really want the data then to figure out what needs to happen in the operating room? Or do you want a trained surgeon that has a gut feel to be able to do that? And at some point as a CMO, man, I can't let that go. But we are, right? And I see it, I've seen myself do it, where I'll sit in the room and it's like, well, that's where the data's leading. It's okay, well, the safest thing to do is to go with the data because then we can blame the data, right, when the thing doesn't work right, rather than stepping up and having a gut feel and saying, no, that's not really what should happen there. But we've got to give that up. I'll tell you a quick story. I'm watching my clock here because I'll tell stories and go really long and you won't eat, because you don't get to eat until I finish, by the way. I don't need to tell that up front, right? But that's the deal. So Red Robin is a great example of letting go. So I was at a conference of finance people. Ooh. I was at this finance conference while I was at Red Robin. Sorry if you're in finance, but I'm sorry. So I understood with this job there would be no math, right? So we're at this conference and this guy comes up and he says, hey, I need to tell you a story about a visit that my family had to Red Robin. And that usually is you kind of go, oh, I hope it's a good one. Oh, you've all been there, right? Hope it's a good one. And he tells me about, it wasn't him, But he sent his daughter in and said, take some of your friends into Red Robin and tell me about it. And this was a big money manager guy, and I'm like, oh gosh. And she was in high school, right after a football game, 10:30, shows up at a Red Robin. We got 30 minutes to close. I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be bad, right? A bunch of teenagers who aren't going to tip. They're going to share food. Half of them are going to have a birthday, want a free sundae. They're going to make a mess, But what that team did, that team at Red Robin did, they decided, hey, we're here, let's just go with it, right? They turned all of the televisions to the local sports channels so they could watch the football highlights from all the teams. A couple of the people went to their high school, so they were singing the fight song with them. So the girl goes back to her dad, and she goes, this was amazing. It's our new hangout place. Several of us, applied for jobs, and he's like, you applied for a job? And she did. Well, this guy wasn't just a money guy. This guy headed up a fund and placed a substantial amount of money in Red Robin on a particular day. We could trace an increase of the value of the company on that day based upon what these people did. They didn't get trained that. They didn't have a customer journey map, right? They just did the right thing, right? They just did culturally the right thing because we had turned the brand over to them. That's a hard thing to do. It's like turning the keys over to your kids, right? For those of you who have done that for the first time, and then you're scared to death. Let go. Man, I gotta let go of this idea that my vision is the only vision. Now, I need to have a vision. They expect a vision. I'm a CMO, right? But ultimately, in the end, I finally got to the place in my career where I said, those kids who has kids, I would imagine a number of you people have kids, okay? When your kids are born, you have this incredible vision for their life, don't you? You've got it all mapped out. Heisman Trophy winners and ballerinas. They're all going to be smart enough to pay for their college. They're never going to have a wreck. They're always going to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. They're going to marry perfect people and live down the block, and they're going to call you every day. Whatever that is, right? And I can say that now. Mine are in their 20s, right? For those of you who have teenagers, there's hope. They get to their 20s, they get married, they buy a car, they buy a house, things get better, right? And they start calling you again because they realize you weren't an idiot. But beside the point. But what happens is then at some point in your life, if you're lucky, what you get to is you get to the place where you think, you know what, if my kids are limited to my vision, how sad is that? Because what I really envision for them is a life beyond something I could have imagined, right? And so what do? You start teaching them character and how to make decisions and what true north looks like and value and these types of things. It's the same thing, I think, with a brand, right? If my brand is limited to me, P.F. Chang's is such a great example. Everything we did of any substance at P.F. Chang's was beyond what I could have imagined. My creative director would come in and he would show me something and I'd go, oh my gosh, I'm glad I didn't give you direction. It would not have been that good. But truly, then it becomes about inspiring people, right? Getting these right people around you and inspiring them and getting people excited about it and letting them live beyond what you could have imagined. And in that particular case in P.F. Chang's, I told you that I was gone. There's a young lady that's there now. She was there when I got there. She's in her young 30s. She's brilliant. Became my number 2, and now she's in charge of marketing at P.F. Chang's because she should be, right? But she probably wouldn't have been, right, if we didn't allow her to blossom underneath that and have her own ideas and to do those things. Sorry, I'm preaching. To move forward. The move forward is with purpose, right? The move forward is about how do we all find this centralized purpose that we're behind? And it's not necessarily the purpose that you're thinking, where it's we're going to have some purpose and true north statement and all these. Could be, probably should be. You need it in your organization. But ultimately, it's about that we have some common goals, and ultimately, in the end, that we're all fighting for what those common goals are, and we're using that as the thing that we look at. One of my favorite things I've ever done, and I've been in a number of brands, but I always come in and usually there's a lag in CMOs, right? And so there's been this lag, and I get there and a bunch of stuff has to get approved, right? And so the creative director would run in and say, listen, we need to get these things approved or we're not going to have menus. And inevitably they'll say, do you like them? They always say the same thing. And I always say no, just to see what the expectation, and they panic immediately. And then I go, well, it doesn't matter what I like, does it? What's the strategy? What were we trying to do? Where was this going, and does it accomplish that? It doesn't matter whether I like green or like blue. I mean, some things matter. I would tell you that when I got to P.F. Chang's, my first interview, within 3 minutes, the CEO, who I love, the CEO looked at me. He wouldn't take me to the office. We met in a restaurant, and he showed me the menu, and he said, I want you to look at that. Tell me what you think of that line. And it said, bring something new to the table. And I'm like, well, I'd have to know the strategy. He goes, no. You tell me what you think of the line. And so I'm kind of caught, and I said, hey, I think it's terrible. Why do you think it's terrible? And now I'm like, oh gosh, this was his line, right? And I said, well, I just don't think it says anything about P.F. Chang's. I mean, everything at P.F. Chang's is made from scratch. Everything. Your fried rice, the soup, made from scratch for you, right? Doesn't say that in there. And I said, yeah, I think it's terrible. And I told him why. And he said, you know how much I paid for that? And I said, I don't know. He said, about $2 million. And I said, oh man, that hurts my heart. And he goes, yeah, it makes me throw up in my mouth. This was my interview, my first 3 minutes. But you know, honestly, the ability, and it's one of the reasons I loved working with him, is because we could have that conversation, right? And this idea of doing that with purpose. Another one of my favorite people, my CEO at Krispy Kreme, an amazing guy. And I'll say that even about a finance guy. He was a finance guy from Wachovia, but he got it. And what he got was that this brand wasn't about donuts. We were a public held company, and I was always with analysts who would say, well, Dwayne, yeah, donuts are kind of hot now, but how long can donuts be relevant? And I said, well, you assume we're in the donut business. And of course, then they're like, okay, marketing guy, what business do you think we're in? And I said, we're in the joy business, right? And no matter where you are in the world, and we, believe it or not, 3/4 of the Krispy Kremes were international, right? No matter where you are in the world, everybody needs some more joy. And I can't imagine a time in this culture that people aren't going to want more joy. And what we heard from our guests was that's why they came in. Now, they didn't say it in those words, right? What they would say is, this is a real focus group. This young lady, I said, the facilitator said, when do you go to Krispy Kreme? She goes, well, I'll go when I get a new boyfriend. And then she stopped and she goes, and then I'll go back when he breaks up with me. But it's the truth, right? And we're getting on both sides. It's good days, it's bad days. It's somebody has, a birthday. It is, you know what? I'll give you another example of a Red Robin one. And this was probably one of the most kind of seminal pieces of research that I was ever involved in. And it probably is similar to any of you who have a consumer-based business at all. But if you ask people about, from a restaurant standpoint, what's your favorite dining experience and wherever it is you like to go, all of you will talk about attributes. You'll all say, well, it's convenient, good variety, place is nice, I like the sushi is really good, great variety. We were talking about sushi earlier. And the people are nice, easy to get in and out, prices are reasonable. That's what you'll say. And then when you go back, and I'll say, well, wait a minute. And by the way, this is going to be a real one. I'm going to give you a real scenario of an individual. I said, so you talked about variety. So why is variety important? What benefit do you get out of variety? Well, I like to take my family to Red Robin, and so when everybody can kind of get something they want, then we don't have that kind of hassle that we have to deal with, and everybody can kind of be happy. And so you kind of go through that list, and then you come back and you say, well, you talked about taking your family and your kids. What's the value in doing that? Well, my wife and I both work, and we don't get to spend enough time with our kids, and sometimes I'm out of town all week, et cetera, et cetera. And then it finally got to the end, and you say, okay, then when that all happens, and it happens right, how does that make you feel? The guy looked at the facilitator and said, man, I never thought about it before, but I feel like a better dad, right? And so as a marketer, man, I'm all about feel like a better dad, right? But I can't tell dad that, because that feels selfish, doesn't it? And the other piece, too, is I can't tell my frontline people, okay, when this guy comes in with his family, make him feel like a better dad, right? The servers are going to look at me and go, what? But what I can do is I can take those attributes, and I can say, hey, when you do these things, it does this, and it makes them feel like a better dad. And they can start putting okay, well, I can do that. I can check that box. And not just our servers, but the designers. What we found was, in Red Robin, one of the reasons why most of the Red Robins, you can actually see the bathroom doors, is because Red Robin is training for little kids to be adults and eat in a human place, right? And parents like to be able to see their kid be able to walk to the bathroom, to the door, and not have to go down some long, dark hall, right? We never thought about that. I'd like to take credit that we put those. It was saving space, to be honest with you, right? We didn't have a long, dark hall, but it worked, right? But I say all those things to talk about this sense of, feel like a better dad. Okay, I'm going to end on this, and we have some time for Q&A. I'm going to end on a brand that's not mine, and talk about that for a second. So, going to get back to a little sadness here and death. But so about 6-7 years ago, my stepmother passed away, and we were talking about Oklahoma City. She was in Oklahoma City. My stepmother passed away, and I had to go and help my dad. He had nobody around. They'd been married for 45 years. For those of you who've seen Rain Man, my dad was a bit of a Rain Man. Not literally, but really close. He ate the same food at the same time every day. He did the same thing every day. He watched the same shows every day. He never went out to eat. They never traveled anywhere. They lived in their house. That was them. And I had to go and convince him to sell his house with everything in it, jump in his little Hyundai with me, and drive to North Carolina and live with us, right? And so everybody I knew was praying for me because this was going to be a problem. And somehow I convinced him to do it, but now we got to take the trip, okay? And if you guys remember the Rain Man trip, this was my trip. And so I'm thinking, well, the guy never goes out to eat. And so I decided, you know what, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm going to go to Cracker Barrel, all right? That's going to be my first trip, is we're going to go to Cracker Barrel. And so we go into Cracker Barrel, and he's sitting there, and he's looking at the menu, and he's trying to figure out, like, how to get what he always eats, right, which isn't in any particular combo. And the lady comes over to the table, and she says, you guys ready to order? And he looks at her, and he's kind of nervous, and he's a very quiet man, and he said, I don't know how to order what I want. And the lady sat down in the chair next to him, and she put her hand on his back, and she said, honey, just tell me what you want, and I'll fix it. Okay? Do you think that was part of training? No. Was that part of the customer journey mapping that we did? No, right? That was somebody entrusted with the brand. And the result of that was, for the next 2.5 days, we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner at Cracker Barrel all the way across the country. And my dad passed away a couple of years ago, and though for the 3.5 years that he lived with us, every Sunday we had Sunday chicken or fried catfish from Cracker Barrel. And in the end of that, I talked to you about feeling like a better dad. What did that make me feel like? A better son, right? That's my memory of Cracker Barrel, and will always be my emotion and memory of Cracker Barrel, no matter what the data says, no matter about their loyalty program, no matter if they use coupons or they have lunch specials. That emotional connection will connect me to Cracker Barrel forever. In addition to, I like fried okra and chicken and dumplings, but that notwithstanding, but that is it, right? And so one of the things that I look at from an internal standpoint is just that, is we got to continue to be emotional. If we allow, data's great, right? The analytics are great. All of those things are great. But if we allow those things to suck the life and the emotion out of the brands that we're with and we represent, right? Well, then, first of all, there's no need for us. There's zero need for us. We can get analysts to be able to do that. My son is a marketing analyst with another company, and he tells me that all the time. He's like, you know what? I got enough data, I can eliminate you, Dad, right? I mean, that's kind of, he pokes at me all the time. But you know what? At some level, it's true, right? At some level, our car can be run without a driver if we allow it to be run without a driver, right? If we're not adding value of the ability to take the facts and lead ourselves to some level of truth.